Becoming a parent is hard. It takes time, patience, dedication, and lots of love. But it doesn't happen overnight. Christy and Steve appear to be a typical two-parent family. They have 2 children, 4-year-old Dominic and 4-month-old Mia. But for them, adjusting to parenthood was far from easy. Christy had 3rd-degree lacerations from Dominic's birth. She couldn't breastfeed and she was too sore to hold him. After 2 days, she began having the baby blues.
Physically, my body is just beat up. I mean, everything naturally goes south and your stomach muscles are gone, and of course, you don't feel very good about yourself. I still don't feel good about myself even after 4 months. I mean, I was flustered and upset about the breastfeeding because I couldn't do it right, and of course not feeling well, and I couldn't get up and down for the baby at all. So it was really, really tough.
About 80% of new mothers go through some form of the blues or postpartum depression, which can include crying fits and loss of appetite. But this usually goes away pretty quickly. If a mother finds that it begins to affect her daily routine, contact a doctor immediately. Because of the physical and emotional upheaval, Christy says she had no time to take care of herself. She didn't eat right or exercise.
I often tell moms they need to treat themselves like an athlete in training after they've had a baby. You need to eat well, you need sleep, at a time when you're not doing either one. So I recommend, with especially eating patterns, that you eat in very small segments. Have a lot of good healthy snack food in the house. Yogurt, cheese, crackers, fresh fruit. And really kind of, as you're feeding your baby, be nibbling.
You don't think to feed yourself first. It's like everybody else comes first and you come like last.
As a result, Christy and Steve also had no time for each other. Every day just seemed to slip by without real conversations or together time.
You don't get out to see a movie, you don't get out to see dinner. It's almost like an event now. It's a special occasion just to go out and have dinner.
You can still have a life, but it has to be tapered, and I think it needs to be done in moderations because the child should come first. But every now and then, a movie, that's self-care. You need to separate yourself sometimes to have a little R&R for yourself.
So you need to make a date. Maybe the day you deliver. Mark your calendar that in 1 month you're going to go on a date without the baby. You have to realize, though, that your communication changes. That after you have a baby, you start talking through the baby, around the baby, instead of talking to each other. So you need to make a pact to say, you know, when we go out, we'll talk about the baby for 5 minutes. Then we're going to talk about other things in our lives. Maybe, what does it feel like to be a mom? What does it feel like to be a dad?
But Christy and Steve never did that, and the rift between them continued to grow. Christy focused on motherhood, and Steve felt like he was left out in the cold.
Dads need to know they need permission, too, to say, this is a big change in my life, and I need some help here. Somebody come and listen to what I have to say, too.
Well, with Dominic, I really domineered. I was the dominant person. I didn't take the help from him, and I made him feel inadequate because every time he would cry, I'd go in and I'd take care of him, and that was hard on him.
At that point, when they're a newborn or a young child, them not being able to say anything to you, but you not being able to comfort them. It's like, I'm doing something wrong. What am I doing? What am I not doing?
And then here's this little person that's requiring needs and they can't talk. So the only way that they can communicate is through crying, and then trying to figure out, well, is this a cry for wet, or is this a cry for hunger, or is this a cry for pain, or is this a cry because I just want to be picked up and held?
And the only way new parents learn this is by asking questions, by creating a support system of people they trust, friends, family members, doctors, anyone they can turn to when they're frustrated or confused. And if they don't have anyone to turn to, they need to do some research. Read books, look on the internet, call the local hospital. Just get the questions answered. But Christy and Steve didn't ask questions. They took everything personally and argued relentlessly. Steve would get angry that Dominic was crying, and Christy would be angry that Steve was mad. It was a vicious circle, and both were afraid to try and break it.
A lot of times we'd go to bed and sleep on either side, just far away from each other, because we just didn't want to talk to each other or see each other. We just didn't get along.
It's like making it through another day.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to bed now. Good
Yeah.
night.
And by morning he'll be out to work, and I'll just take over again, and everything will be fine until he gets home again from work.
In the meantime, Christy saw a friend's marriage fail, and she realized that she and Steve weren't trying hard enough to make their marriage work.
I got to a point where she said, you need to change because I can't live like this anymore.
And we just kind of finally started talking, and he finally explained to me how he felt hurt.
Today, parenthood is much easier for Christy and Steve. They both know where their strengths are, and they share responsibilities. Bottom line, they learned how to communicate, and through their love for their children, they vowed to make it last.
I can have a bad day at work, and I come home and it's like, Daddy, you're home. You know, he's got a smile on his face, he's happy to see me, and he wants to play.
Yeah.
Just makes your bad day, just forget about it.
Yeah. And
It always gives you like goosebumps.
Yeah, they're just the best thing in the world to have.
So we're going to start off with postpartum depression. It is a very serious thing that plagues anyone. It can plague the person who seems to have everything in its place to the person who's always frazzled. It is something that's people are afraid to think and talk about because they think that there's something wrong with them. But if you don't get the help that you need, a lot of serious things can happen. So we're going to look at postpartum depression, and this is going to go beyond the baby blues. And so your little research that you'll do for your project, you will see the difference between postpartum depression and the baby blues. So the range of postpartum or post-delivery mood disorders, it's about 50 to 80% of women experience transient baby blues within the first 2 weeks following delivery.
What he wanted most were...
Amber Coder Pouline cherishes the time she spends with her son Lorenzo now, but at the time he was born, her much-anticipated joy had been eclipsed by despair.
I was in such a state of depression and anxiety that I would simply have been unable to survive in that way for much longer, in my opinion.
Unable to survive a depressive mood disorder known as postpartum depression, or PPD. Amber had looked forward to the birth of her son and had carefully planned the details of the birthing experience, including a natural childbirth. Instead, she was forced to have an emergency cesarean section.
When a nurse came in and they asked if I was ready to see my baby, and I said no, and that was something that naturally came out of my mouth, but afterwards I was horrified.
One of the more common triggers for depression is feeling overwhelmed by events or circumstances. Any life-altering event, positive or negative, can tip the balance for those vulnerable to mood disorders. And for some, the events don't even have to be all that life-altering.
I've also seen people who have incredible wealth and have all kinds of things going for them, things that we can only dream about, who might make a suicide attempt because the chauffeur didn't show up.
Common signs of depression can include feelings of hopelessness, difficulty sleeping, anxiety, irritability, and lack of concentration. In the case of PPD, guilt may also play a major role.
After several weeks of this process of dealing with these difficulties, breastfeeding, and the guilt surrounding another failure of this natural process that I thought would just come instinctively to me, that women had done for thousands of years, and that somehow, in some way, I wasn't able to succeed at, I was really devastated.
PPD is different from the typical baby blues that can occur due to hormonal changes after birth. The lows are more profound, and symptoms rarely go away without treatment.
If depression or any disorder is impairing their ability to take care of the baby, then there's some heightened concern about that.
Amber knew her feelings were abnormal and got help. Since her recovery, she's made it her mission to help other moms with postpartum disorders by becoming a support group leader, creating a website, and authoring a blog. Not surprisingly, she's become a bit of an expert on the subject.
When you hear someone who's actually survived this disorder say, "I fully recovered," you're not alone. You're not crazy. I felt the same way that you're feeling. It doesn't make you a bad mom. It has a lot more weight than someone who's never experienced a postpartum depression saying those things to a mom. Go, go, go.
With proper support, PPD is often successfully treated. But like other forms of depression, taking time to concentrate on your own health is key. For WebMD, I'm Damon Mahart.
So postpartum depression can start as early as 24 hours after delivery or as late as several months following your delivery. So some of the symptoms of postpartum depression includes hopelessness, feeling of helplessness, persistent sadness, irritability, low self-esteem, loss of pleasure in activities, mood changes, inability to adjust to the role of motherhood, inability to concentrate, and sleep and appetite disturbances. So the range of symptoms can go from mild dysphoria to suicidal ideation to psychotic depression. If untreated, symptoms can last for several months, and it can even go into the second year of postpartum. Causes of postpartum depression. There are several theories based in physiological changes that have been researched, but there's nothing concrete on what causes postpartum or who would get postpartum. So, some other theories cite numerous psychosocial factors associated with postpartum depression. It could be marital conflict, childcare difficulties. Maybe your baby is colicky and he is very fussy, can't sleep, or maybe the baby has health problems. If the mom thinks that the baby is difficult with its temperament, if there's a history of family or personal depression, it could lead to postpartum depression. So the higher rates of depression are noted among women who have had less than a high school education, were less than 19-year-olds when they got pregnant, you live in a household with a low income, you had an unexpected pregnancy, you've reported being abused before or during your pregnancy. If you had 0 to 1 person as a source of social support, you're going to find that once you become pregnant, your friends, if they're not pregnant with you, they kind of go on and do their own things. So sometimes you lose that social aspect that you have around you, and it becomes very depressing. If you're not married, reported 6 to 18 stresses during pregnancy, and some of the stresses can include sick family members, divorce, loss of job, loss of a loved one, etc. So the impact of postpartum depression is immense. The long-term consequences of PDD or PPD is the negative impact on your child's social, emotional, and cognitive development. 2-month-old infants of mothers with PPD had decreased cognitive ability and expressed more negative emotions during testing. Babies of mothers with PPD were perceived by their mothers as more difficult to care for and more bothersome. Some risk factors for postpartum depression. These can include family history of mood disorders, anxiety or depression during pregnancy, previous postpartum depression, if you had baby blues following the current delivery, childcare difficulties, which means feeding is hard, sleeping, the baby doesn't sleep, the baby has health issues, if you have marital conflicts, if you have stressful events in your life, or if you have poor social support. So the best way to get treatment is first to educate the women and her support system regarding the diagnosis of postpartum depression. It is not something that you can just sweep under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist. Mothers with postpartum depression can neglect their baby. Their baby can sit screaming and crying for the whole day and the mom won't do anything. So if you or someone you know is suffering from postpartum depression, in order to make sure that that baby is not neglected or harmed in any way, you need to make sure that that person gets help. So some options include pharmaceutical intervention. You know, there's a lot of drugs out there that might be able to help mom. Counseling, whether it be individual counseling or in group counseling, and joining support groups. So there are a lot of support groups. If you are looking for support groups, contact your local mental health agencies, hospitals, and you can do some Google web search. So here are some websites that I'm actually going to include onto Schoology so that you guys can go and use this to help you do your assignment. So in summary, postpartum depression is very common, and it can have long-term consequences for mother, infant, and the family. It's easily missed or ignored, and it should be screened for, and it can be treated successfully.